remember where I'm going here. In 3, 2. One of these times I am going to come up with a fancy theme song. Amber and I were singing the Itchy and Scratchy song last night, and that might work. It could work. You know, they fight, they fight, they fight, they fight, they fight, 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 fight. It's the Psychic Derailer Show. But maybe not. This episode of the Psychic Derailer podcast is brought to you by, well, me. I did talk to our my benevolent overlords at Tinker Coffee. The bikes coupon code is still good. So if you want to sign up for a Tinker Coffee subscription, never run out of fresh coffee, just use the coupon code BIKES at checkout, and you'll get 25% off your first month's subscription. If you're like me, the worst thing in the world is to go into the cupboard on that Saturday or Sunday morning and have no coffee. You never have to do that with a Tinker Coffee subscription, so go to tinkercoffee.com, sign up for subscription today. The podcast could be brought to you by Yeti. If anybody knows anybody out there at Yeti, I'm open to the possibilities. As I sip my Yeti coffee my Tinker coffee out of my Yeti tumbler. Today I am joined by, well, he's a bit of a legend in the bicycling world.
No.
Well, I don't know. I put that thing on Instagram yesterday, and people were coming out of the woodwork. You're very important to them.
Well, it's a nice feeling.
Yeah. Maynard Hershon. He wrote a book at one point. Well, he's written a lot of things. But would you say that Tales from the Bike Shop is probably the thing you're...
There were two books. There was Tales from the Bike Shop. That was a collection of stories that ran in Winning magazine, Bicycle Racing Illustrated.
Yep, I'm old enough to remember that.
And then there was a second book that was published in the mid-'90s after I went to work for Vela News, and it was called Half Wheel Hell. I wonder if I should explain Half Wheel Hell.
Please do.
If you're riding with someone, and you two are riding happily along side by side and chatting, and your riding partner is always sticking the front of his bicycle out in front of you by 18 inches, and then you have to speed up to get next to him again, and he just does it again, rides forward 18 inches and hangs there, and you have to chase him. And it turns a very nice ride into a terrible ride, and I don't think they know they do it. I don't think people do it deliberately. I think it's a little bit of a Type A program.
Yeah, I think it's both. I think that some people just don't know they do it, and some people do it, and there's nothing Type A about it. And then I think that there are other people that do it because they've got to be winning. You know.
That's a sad thing.
And that may be unconscious, and it probably is unconscious as well. I've always had this, starting, into cycling when I did. The only people you could ride with were people that raced, by and large. It wasn't a recreational. The touring boom had come and gone, and so if you were out on the road, you were riding with people that raced. And then, the mountain bike thing happened, but that was like off season. I mean, you didn't do that as a primary thing. That was when you weren't riding on the road. Well, maybe we'll go ride some trails.
My memory agrees with yours.
And now that I never raced. I did one cyclocross race in the early 2000s, and that was the only race I ever did. That's a story in and of itself. It was before the cyclocross boom. I got talked into doing the master's class at the morning of the event. As it turned out, once I changed classes, there were only 4 masters. So I ended up placing 3rd in the masters division. And then after the race was over, found out that it was the Indiana-Kentucky District Championships.
Oh, no.
So they handed me a medal. I was like, what the hell is this for? And he goes, well, didn't you know this is the Indiana-Kentucky District Championships? And I was like, you got to be kidding me. So I accepted my medal and then promptly retired. The point being is that riding with those people teaches you how to ride. And, you know, back then, even your friends, you know, you got 1 or maybe 2 warnings, and then if you continued to do things that were not, you know, proper, you know, there were consequences, you know, and I would say the nicest of the consequences would be they would just drop you and leave you out in the middle of the country, and then you would never be asked back. Now, I don't know that I necessarily agree with that, but I don't think that people need to race, by and large. I think a certain number of people do. But I do think it's instructive riding with those people, and you do get a sense of how to ride with other people and how to handle yourself on the streets with cars. I do wish that, you know, as much as I love this new, well, I don't even know that it's new, but the revitalization of this just ride, right? If we use a Grant term, just ride. I do sometimes wish that those people had a little bit more structure in their, you know, because half-wheel hell is a real thing, and it makes me kind of nervous sometimes.
I came up in the second half of the 70s and into the 80s riding with racers and racing myself. And we learned how to ride a rotating pace line.
Mm-hmm.
We learned how to ride side by side, close to one another, and not be nervous. We learned that there was a way things were done. And that way that things were done was the same everywhere in the world.
Right.
So, and you were a bike rider. As the years have passed, so many new riders who look just like bike riders.
Yeah.
They're wearing Lycra, they're riding carbon fiber bikes, but they can't ride close together. And the group rides, club rides, are raggle-taggle, and there's no discipline, and people don't understand that their bicycles don't have brake lights, and they don't point out potholes or obstacles. There's none of that form, that discipline that you're just talking about, that we took for granted all those years. But it's pretty much gone. So I'm sort of stuck now because because I'm old now and I'm not strong enough to ride with young racer types.
Right.
And I'm scared to death to ride with other middle-aged folks, no matter how slick they look.
You can just join us on the greenways. It's perfectly fine.
Well, we have an extensive bike path network in Denver. We probably have 300 miles of bike paths.
Yeah.
And those paths are pretty much okay except for morning and afternoon, when the new urban cyclist appears and tries to knock you down.
Because are they training?
Oh no, they're going to work.
Oh, they're going to work.
They're the fastest cyclists in the world for 1.5 miles
Yeah.
on the way to work. So you can't ride at rush hour.
Yeah.
It's interesting having watched over the years and seen how things have changed. I don't hear so much anti-Lycra talk as I did a decade ago. That anything that had anything to do with racing was just distasteful. And I don't hear that so much anymore. But there's a big separation between your urban fixie rider or somebody on an old Fuji 10-speed and somebody who really looks and acts like a racer.
I think the issue that I've had with Lycra is not so much. I spent decades wearing it. I'm not going to begrudge somebody for doing that. It's this idea that that it had to be done. That if you didn't do it, then you weren't a finger quotes real, cyclist. And
you're going to get me started here.
Well, yeah.
No,
that's why you're here.
There were a lot of things that we did that were part of being authentic. And we desperately wanted to be authentic. We wanted to be the real thing, real bike riders. So we rode Campagnolo parts, and we rode Italian frames. And we probably didn't wear helmets, and we wore little cycling caps perched way up on top of our heads. And we always wore white socks, and most of us shaved our legs. That was how you were supposed to comport yourself and how you were supposed to look if you were a genuine bike rider. And there weren't very many commuters. And the tourists, the tourists were club riders, and once or twice a year they would take a tour on their bicycle, but they weren't like committed cyclotourists. And maybe they didn't even own like a genuine touring bike. They rode whatever they owned.
Right.
And just as you said, when you rode with people in the 70s and the 80s, most of the people who were riding really regularly were racers or ex-racers or people who came from that milieu. Is that the right word?
Yeah.
Came from that.
Right.
That's an interesting comment because because of the way your shop is now, I sort of didn't expect you to say that. Because your shop is like an anti-racer kind of a shop.
I've got over the last, let's call it 3 or 4 years. I'll try to be conservative and say 3 or 4 years. I'm trying to get to the point where I'm not anti anything. If you want to do it,
it's a steep hill to climb.
Well, I know. It's a struggle.
It is a struggle. It's a lifetime struggle.
But if you want to do it, great. It's just not what I'm going to do. And what I want to do is, because I think that the majority of the people out there, the people that want to ride bikes, the whole idea that the industry has, starting with Greg LeMond, but really it ramped up with Lance, that, guys who were, 45 years old and 50 pounds overweight needed to have, a carbon fiber racing bike with 23C tires, and they needed to wedge themselves, into Lycra. That's a high cost of entry.
Oh.
Right? So you take somebody who, maybe really wants to ride a bike. It'd be like, it's like going to a car dealer and, trying to sell somebody a car that you can take out and race on the track. These analogies have been used a million times over, but I think it raised the price of entry, not only financially, but I think, in some cases, mentally, people just couldn't get to the point where they're like, I'm not going to wear that. They were just uncomfortable with the thought of wearing all this stuff that was so tight that it left a lot of people out. So, I'm at the point now where it's like, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And I think the bet that I'm making is that there are a lot of people out there who feel the same way, even if right now maybe they don't know it.
And they wander into your shop and they look around and they think, well, maybe I do feel that way.
Yeah. I mean, I've had 2 or 3 people that would say, can I do this? And I'd be like, what do you mean, can you? It's your bike. Do whatever you want. If it's something that I think really just doesn't make sense from a safety standpoint or, from a functionality standpoint, I'll certainly let you know. But if you want to put toe clips on your bike, put toe clips on your bike. I don't care. There's no rules. The only rule is it's your bike. You do what, makes you happy. Do what is going to make you ride the damn thing more. Period. End of sentence.
We weren't that easy on ourselves.
No. We weren't, and let's be honest, I've said a million times that, when you talk about the downfall of bike shops, we weren't all that easy on customers either. As young men, 22, 23 years old, we were given a responsibility, and we did not take that responsibility all that seriously a lot of the time.
Not as seriously as we did our racing or our training.
Or people that walked into the store that we thought were, worthy of our, our attention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that no longer the case?
Oh, I'm sure it is. It has to be. I mean, that's human nature. But, I certainly, I try not to be that way. Again, try being the operative word. I mean, I'm only human after all. But, yeah, I think that certainly there's some of that exists still.
We made so many mistakes as young guys.
Yeah.
It seems like that's a minor one compared to the other things we did.
It's true. So before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's back up.
Okay.
How did the writing start?
I was working in a bicycle shop, Sunshine Bikes in Fairfax, California, in Marin County. And when I say that now, it sounds like I would say I was living in paradise, and I sort of was.
But you were born here.
I was born in Flint, Michigan.
Okay.
I was a young man in Indianapolis, and then in the early 60s, I migrated to California so that I could work year-round in the motorcycle business and make a living.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then in 1974, I was living in a place that had no bus service on the San Francisco Peninsula, and my motorcycle broke. And I was sharing a place with another guy, and he had a bicycle. So I started riding, and I immediately fell in with the same kind of guys you were just talking about. They were racers.
Mm-hmm.
And I bought an entry-level Raleigh bicycle, which in those days had tubular tires, and it was a silly bicycle in retrospect, but that was what there was.
Yeah.
Then in 1983, I'd been riding for 7 or 8 years, and I was working at Sunshine Bikes in Fairfax, and the phone rang. And it was a new bicycle newspaper, Bay Area bicycle newspaper, and they wanted somebody to cover bicycle racing. And I answered the phone. And in retrospect, that was the call that I needed to have. But I spent a few weeks before I called the guy back. And I wrote a couple articles for that newspaper. It's called California Bicyclist. And I don't think they ever liked me there. I think they thought I was politically conservative and maybe a homophobe. And
this is in the 70s?
this is in 1983.
Oh, sorry, 83. Okay.
And and they weren't really excited about me. And then I got another phone call from my friend Owen Mulholland, the late Owen Mulholland, who was the first American ever to ride in a press car at the Tour de France. He was Bicycling Magazine's racing editor, which was a big deal in those days.
Right.
And there was a new magazine called Winning, starting in Pennsylvania. And he had written a column for the first issue of Winning about a clever bike shop owner who helps people in nice ways. And they needed somebody to write a column every issue, and Owen felt he was not going to be able to do that, and he suggested me on the strength of no information at all. He just had a hunch. And I sent him a column, and they liked it okay, but it wasn't perfect. And I sent him another column, and they ran it. And suddenly, I was the only person writing in the English language for a bicycle publication anywhere in the world who had a space in the magazine that he could fill as he saw fit. And that was a wonderful opportunity. But it was a big responsibility because it was a racing magazine, and I represented people who'd been riding since the 50s and 60s. And here I was, a relative newcomer, but somehow I had caught the spirit of the times, and I wrote stuff that people liked. And I began to get bicycles offered to me, and trips to Italy offered to me, and trips to Holland offered to me, and trips to the Tour de France. And I began to be a relative big shot in cycling. I wrote for Winning for 11 years, as memory serves, from 83 until 94. And then I got an offer from Vela News for substantially more money, an offer I couldn't afford to turn down. And I was in the back page of Vela News for several years. And then they started hiring a few guys. I think as a writer, as you get older, you can lose your readers a little bit, because your readers aren't getting older necessarily. Readers are growing younger. And maybe you become a little out of touch. And I became a little bit of a dinosaur. So I wrote for them sporadically until about maybe 98. And then for a long time I wrote for a newspaper called the Bicycle Paper out of Seattle, Pacific Northwest paper. And that was my major bicycling gig. And I wrote advertising copy for people. I wrote the Serrata catalog. I wrote the Fuji catalog. And I help people with this and that. And I was in, I wrote for a Bridgestone catalog quite often.
Oh, okay. Well,
And I was in the Rivendell Reader for years. And that was a lot of fun. It's a funny thing, as an aside. Many times, you don't even know the people in the office of the publication. You've never met any of them. You write something and you attach it to an email and you send it. And hopefully they leave it pretty much alone.
right.
But you don't know who the people are. If you passed them on the street, you wouldn't know them. And now I've been writing for a British motorcycle magazine for 25 years, and I've never met anybody associated with the magazine. That's a quarter of a century.
Yeah.
And yet, I mean, we have good email relationships, but again, if we passed on the street, I wouldn't know who was passing. It's funny. And a couple of times I've gone back to where I went to college and talked to creative writing classes about writing for publication. Because it isn't exactly what you expect. It's an interesting thing. Because once you've sent that piece in, you have lost control of it. You don't own it anymore, the magazine does. And they do with it pretty much what they need to. And you have to sort of keep that in mind.
I wish I had talked to you before I wrote my book.
I didn't know you had a book.
It was one of those dummies.
You wrote a book?
Yeah.
A dummy book?
Yeah. I got an email. Amber and I were sitting at dinner, and I get this email, and I about just deleted it, but instead I kind of skimmed it, and then I looked at it a little closer, and I looked at her, and I said, I think I just got an email from somebody that wants me to write a book, and they were looking for somebody locally to write. What's it called? Bike? Is it? I can't ever remember whether it's bicycle or bike. I think it's bike repair and maintenance for dummies. Or no. God, I'm sorry.
Is that a local outfit?
No,
that dummies outfit?
No. It's not dummies. Jesus, how could I have done that? I hope nobody ever listens to this. It's an idiot's guide.
Oh, right.
Idiot's Guide to Bike Repair and Maintenance. Yeah, that the publishing house or the subsidiary is local. So they were looking for somebody local because they hired a photographer and they could go into the bike shop and take pictures for the thing.
Oh.
And so, yeah, I sent them a couple, and I had a blog. I had things to send them, and plus things to show them, and they ended up giving me the job. They tell you initially how much money they're going to pay you to do this, and your first thought is, good Lord, that's a lot of money. And you get about 2 weeks into writing it, and you go, this is not enough money. So you go through all the pain and suffering of writing the thing, and then I thought, that's okay, I'm done. No. Silly boy. Because then they send it to the editor, who knows absolutely zero about bike maintenance and repair.
Oh.
And she started chopping this thing up. And had I talked to you prior to that, maybe I would have taken it a little better. But man,
broke your heart.
It pissed me off. It didn't break my heart. It pissed me off. It's like, I told her at one point, I said, I spent a lot of time writing this goddamn thing, and I'm not going to write it twice. So, but it all worked out in the end. They got their book, and I got some money, and
that's good.
And never the twain shall meet. So,
what I had to do was I had to write bicycle catalogs.
Yeah,
for bicycles that didn't exist yet. In
Yeah.
other words, you had to talk about a bike based on a very scanty product description. Because the bicycles were still in a process of being made.
Yeah.
And that was an interesting thing, and it made me very skeptical of reading catalog copy. I don't remember it as being hard labor, although Fuji, for instance, made so many models. There were just pages and pages and pages of models.
Right.
But with Serrata, representing somebody like Ben Serrata, who's an icon,
right,
and he's a much loved man in the industry, representing him, being the voice of Ben Serrata. Oh, and I wrote 2 Greg LeMond Cycles catalogs. And I've been to Greg's house in Minnesota. I mean, I had wonderful experiences. But representing those guys who are your heroes, really, idols is a responsibility. How we doing?
No, we're good. I'm just
Good.
I did one of these where the battery died halfway through. I just want to make sure that doesn't happen again.
No, I hope not.
No, I mean writing copy for product that doesn't yet exist makes detailing a hub adjustment seem like pretty easy work.
You have to think, if there's a guy who writes the Lexus catalog, has he ever driven that new Lexus?
Probably not.
No. And he has a list of the features on the car and the technical developments, whatever they are, and he has to imagine what the car might be like to drive.
Well, and you have to think too that the brand probably has 3 or 4 or 10 anchor words that describe their product, and once you've done it a couple times, you know where to plug those anchor words in, like rich Corinthian leather, and you can use those until such time as the marketing department comes in and tells you that the anchor words have changed. We're no longer using rich Corinthian leather. We're using, perforated leatherette, new hide or something to that effect.
New buck.
Yes, right. So how did the book? Who decided to take all the articles and put them together in a book?
The first book, Tales from the Bike Shop, was published by Vitesse Press in Brattleboro, Vermont. Those were the people who had the original Vellum News before Vellum News got sold and moved to Boulder. So Vitesse Press told me to assemble 50 stories. And I don't know how many stories I had, maybe 120 stories at that point. And by the way, if you'd have told me in 1983 that I had 120 stories in my head about bicycling, I'd have thought you were crazy.
Yeah.
But somehow, month after month, I always came up with something. It's like, it's a mysterious process. I don't think writers really know where all that comes from. And when it works the best, it seems to percolate up through your brain and through your fingertips into the keyboard, and it sort of takes over and writes itself.
Oh, the best ads, because I got to the point where the people that I worked for, I wrote, their radio copy. And then I got to the point where, because of my background in college, I talked them into actually letting me go into the radio studio and actually do my stuff. Like, so, okay, I wrote it. I want to go in and voice it as well. But the best radio ads I ever wrote, I wrote almost from beginning to end entirely in my head. Like, the idea started and the words just went just filled in. And I was usually on my bike or on the treadmill or something like that, and I would just kind of go off. I'd start thinking about what I needed to talk about, and before I was done, I had a 30 or a 60-second ad, and all I had to do was go to a pad of paper and write it down,
It's marvelous when that happens.
Yeah, it doesn't happen too much anymore.
Well, you have a very writerly way of talking. You put together grammatical sentences, all the intonations. I can see that you would have been really good at that.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I've been told that I had a conversational style. It's like I said I didn't even know I had a style. It was like my banjo teacher telling me that he liked my style, and I said I didn't even know wasn't aware I had a style.
Were you a banjo player before you were a uke player?
No, I came to this. You ever want to freak a banjo player out? I just tell them that I came to the banjo through the ukulele, and they look at me like I got another head growing out of the side of my head.
It's a completely different technique, isn't it?
No, because I was playing clawhammer on the ukulele.
Ah.
And then I had a banjo teacher tell me if you want to play climb or banjo, the only thing you need is a banjo. And so I went, okay. And I got a banjo.
And I bet it's really fun to play the banjo.
It is fun. And I'm really lucky that the lady in the house seems to like it as well. Because it would be tough if she didn't.
Yes.
Because they're a little noisy. But yeah. It's really funny, and I put this on the Instagram post yesterday, that, again, one of the most well-known writers in all of bicycling, and I met you at a ukulele workshop
in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
In Fort Wayne, well, yeah, in really like a 30 minutes. What was it? Woodburn or something like that.
I think maybe it was Woodburn,
yeah,
Indiana.
like 20 or 30 minutes outside of Fort Wayne, in the middle of GD nowhere. You need to get back on that horse. And
I put it down. The responsibility of practicing was weighing heavily on me.
This is the thing. This is where you got it all wrong. There shouldn't be a responsibility. You should just pick it up and have fun with it.
Well, it's right there next to my desk.
Yeah.
I can pick it up.
It's good for the old walnut,
Oh, I'm sure it is.
Absolutely. Every time you learn part of a new tune or figure out how to play a new chord, that's good for the old gray matter. Keeps that thing ticking. I don't know how tuned in you are to, do you follow the bike industry at all?
Well, for people who aren't aware of this, the Bicycle Industry Journal is called Bicycle Retailer and Industry News, and I've known the editor for some years. And I saw him at a holiday party at a really nice bike shop in Boulder called Vecchio's. And he said, gee, would you like to write something for Bicycle Retailer and Industry News? And I thought, what a great idea. So I sent him a piece, and he ran it, but I never got a copy. I've never seen it in print. And I sent him a drawing that my wife did of a pair of old 7-Eleven cycling gloves.
Yeah.
Was that with the article?
I got to be honest with you. I skim Bicycle Retailer.
It's more than you want to know?
Well, yeah, it's more than that, but yeah, I skim it to see if there's any interesting articles, but most of the opinion pieces, I either think they're trying to be too smart by half, or at this point it doesn't, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm kind of out of the loop, at this point. 900 square feet and two bike brands that most people have never heard of.
No, I can see that. It doesn't touch your life.
Right.
I hoped that I could find a permanent place in Bicycle Retailer Industry News, because I have no bicycle business gig anymore.
Right.
And I miss it.
Well, maybe you could be Grant's blog editor.
That's a thought. He's had every opportunity to ask me.
Yeah.
And never has. But he, I did some work for him not long ago on some catalog copy, and he sent me this, like a care package full of nice Rivendell stuff that I use, and he's a sweet man. He's an idiosyncratic sweet man.
Well, absolutely.
But at base, where his heart is, he's a wonderful fellow.
If he wasn't who he was, the bikes wouldn't be what they are.
No, that's right. He's staunchly what he is.
Yeah.
I would not say rigidly. I'd say staunchly. He defends his positions well, and he believes in certain things and he follows through. His bicycles reflect what he is, just as you just said. And I love working with him. He needs a little help in certain areas, but they're not areas that affect the bicycle.
Right.
They're in areas that reflect the way he presents himself to the world.
Yeah. He does have a sense of humor about it occasionally.
Yes.
I can't remember how many years ago it was now that he was at Interbike, and a picture showed up of him in front of a carbon fiber Bridgestone time trial bike, and he crouched down in front of it, and somebody took a picture, and he had the thumbs up, his tongue firmly planted in cheek.
Boy, does he hate a carbon fiber fork.
He's not a big fan.
No.
Not a big fan at all.
Now, I've seen him where somebody drove into a garage with the bike on the roof.
Yep.
But it would have rendered a steel fork unusable.
I think his point is that when carbon fails, it fails catastrophically.
No, I can see that.
And
you're going to the emergency room.
If you're lucky, that's the best case scenario, is that you're going to the emergency room. I think it goes back to, we all like, at some point the bicycle became, what's the best way to put this? If we think about it, I've always said that riding a bicycle is one of the few things that you can do as an adult, and it's, by and large, it's accepted, right? That you can do it and you also did it as a child. There are very few things that you can do as an adult that you did as a child.
I've never been down this path. This is interesting.
And the bike was, as a child, the bike was, it was kind of a toy, right? I mean, it wasn't one of these. It was and then all of a sudden, now the bike is supposed to be, this serious, legitimate form of transportation
or athletic tool,
or and they're both of those things. But in reality, I think we're mostly still trying to sell them as toys, right? They're just more expensive toys, because does a guy who's my age, 53 years old, and let's be honest, easily 40 pounds overweight.
No.
Does that person need, and again, need is a very slippery word.
Oh, a 17-pound bicycle.
Right. I mean, so what's the purpose of that other than we like shiny toys, right? Whereas if
there are only maybe do you think there's 100,000 people like that in America riding $6,000 bicycles?
Well, there's probably only 400 in the world that are genetically disposed to actually riding them the way they're supposed to be ridden.
See, that's an interesting question. That's an interesting question. But look at Ferraris. How many Ferraris are owned and driven by really qualified drivers?
No, but that Ferrari is not the only car they have.
No, that's a fact.
Whereas
and the bicycle probably is
absolutely,
the only bicycle.
Absolutely. Because, there are outliers, to be certain. But, a 45-year-old guy who's got a good job but also has a wife and 2.5 kids and, vet bills and cheerleading camp, they may be able...
Vet bills and cheerleading camp.
I mean...
That was very nicely said.
Well, these are all things that I've heard, I can't buy this because... that all just goes into the noggin. You may be able to get past, spending, $3,500 or $4,500 on a bicycle once. That's going to pass through the finance committee once. Most of the time. You're not going to do it multiple times. Because it's going to be, what do you need another bike for? You've already got, you spent all this money on this bike. And the answer of, well, I know, but this bike is for this, and it's not for this. I need a bike that's for this.
What is it, N plus one?
Yeah, right.
How many bicycles do you need? Whatever you have plus one.
Right. Well, or in the Captain Bob McKee put it even better, which was, what's the perfect number of bikes to have? And I just looked at him, and he goes, "There's an answer to this question. What's the perfect number of bikes to have?" And I looked at him, and he just said, "Just one more. Just one more." But that doesn't fly.
Have you gotten past that yet?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I have to.
I get to the point where if I've got more than if I have more than I have now, which is 4 or 5, I mean, I get to the point where I'm looking around going, why do I have all these, I got down to the point where I had 2 or 3, and that felt really good, It doesn't really need to be any more than that. But then fall comes and winter comes, and I get bored, and I start thinking, and I start looking around and rooting around in all the parts boxes and start pulling parts out, and the next thing you know, it's like, well, Christ, all I need is a frame. And I could build another bike. And then the next thing you know, you've got another bike.
Yeah. But I'm not around all these parts all the time, so I don't have that temptation. I have 2 steel bikes now, and it's all my bikes, 2 bikes, and one of them spends the winter on the trainer.
Oh, you're still doing that?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, I do that.
Oof.
Yeah, see, I came up that way.
Yeah. I did too. I let it go.
I can't do that. It isn't that I have got my head down and I'm going as hard as I can all the time.
You just want to keep your legs moving.
Yeah, and I ride at a pretty brisk pace.
Yeah.
For an old guy. And it's hard when you've been part of that culture. It's hard to shed that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, it's just boring as hell. It bores me to tears.
It does, really?
Oh, God, yeah. That's why I put it down.
Do you ride by yourself most of the time or with folks?
I ride by myself if I'm going back and forth to work. And then on the weekends...
Group rides?
No. It's me and Amber. And maybe a couple friends. I don't ride in groups anymore. It's got to be people I know.
Yeah.
Or if it's a group, it's got to be manageable. I mean, because I was riding with guys that I rode with them so much that I could see the guy in front of me, I could see his hip move, and I knew exactly where he was going. And he also knew that I wasn't going to be in his way. He wasn't going to run into me. And I just have a really hard time.
No, and not a word was spoken, and all this stuff was just understood.
Yeah.
When pro cyclists retire, and they don't train as much, they can't go on those same rides that they always used to ride. That's a really hard thing, I think, because they yearn for that sort of. It's more than camaraderie. And the conversations on rides, they just seem to flow. It's a wonderful experience for people who've learned how to live this life.
There was a store there up on the north side, not far from where your niece is. And they started doing these group rides, and it got to the point where they had hundreds of people showing up. And
really?
they had to break them up into, 3 or 4 groups. And there's a local guy who was a pro. And he said he went to that ride once, and he said No.
Too scary.
Too sketchy. He goes, guys in the middle of the pack, cross-eyed, trying to stay in the group that had no business being there. And he said, there's just no way. He goes, somebody's going to get killed. And so yeah, I'm not, and I just I don't want to spend the time to have the fitness necessary to go out and sit in a group or in a pace line. It just doesn't, putting in miles for the sake of putting in miles has absolutely no attraction to me anymore. If I'm going to ride my bike, it's going to be a function of I'm going to either go to work, I'm going to go to the store, or, if we're out on the weekend and we're just riding the Greenway, well, then I'm spending time with Amber and we're having, we're outside doing that. So I don't really count that either. But, I'm riding for the pleasure and enjoyment of riding, or I'm using it as transportation. I don't even have, I think the skinniest tires I have on a bike right now are probably 42 millimeters wide.
Wow.
So, and that's, my other issue with this focus for the last, since 99, in that 99 when Lance won the first tour.
Is that right? Do you remember that? Was it 99?
I think it was 99. Yeah. This focus on racing is that once that guy, and I'm going to say guy because I think mentally this is where guys are, when they figure out that they're never going to get from the B group to the A group, or they can't, life gets in the way, right? And they've got, vet bills and cheerleading camp, and they can't stay in the A group anymore because they can't go to the ride as often as is needed to do that. What's going to happen? That person isn't going to sell. I don't think that person's going to then sell their racing bike and buy a touring bike or buy something like that and start riding for, leisure and transportation. I just don't think it's going to happen. Again, there may be some outliers, and maybe it will. But I think by and large, that person's going to take that bike and is going to sell it, and they're going to go back to playing golf, or they're going to take up, scuba diving or drone racing or someplace else where they can spend their money. And I don't know, so I don't know that this focus on racing to the exclusion of everyone else, what you're not doing, you're not creating lifelong customers. You're creating customers for the 2 or 5 or 12 years that they can manage to fit that into their life. And then once they're gone, they're gone. That's just, I don't know. I could be wrong, but it certainly seems that that's the case.
See, I resist believing that, but the fact is that as I think about it, it seems to be true. I would like to form a club in Denver for people who did race but are still riding and know how to ride and can do a slower ride, but with the same sort of organization and form and discipline.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard to find those guys. There's thousands of cyclists in Denver and Boulder, and,
sure.
And you could find people who might claim to be those guys, and then you find out that they've never ridden a wheel, they've never ridden close behind somebody and drafted, they don't know how a rotating pace line works, they don't know all the little, like that movement of the hip that you're talking about, they don't know about those little things. But they want to be in your group because it sounds cool. And then your group doesn't work. It's a difficult thing.
And the next thing you know, you're drone racing.
Yeah. Yeah. As reluctant as I am to believe it, there's a lot of truth in that.
And, the motorcycle thing can't be much different, right? There's etiquette and protocol with, let's be honest, much higher stakes when you're riding a motorcycle.
My feeling is that motorcycle riding is safer than bicycle riding. If you ride a bicycle every day on the bike paths in urban Denver, Colorado, you will get knocked down. You can ride a motorcycle every day, and especially if you don't commute in the middle of town, you're probably going to be okay. And you can ride thousands of miles on the highway, and you're probably going to be okay. I've been hurt on the motorcycle, but I've been hurt more on the bicycle. I have a titanium femur because of a bicycle crash, and I think I've broken 3 collarbones, and 2 of them were bicycle crashes. And my wife got knocked off her bike on a Denver bike path, and it's really common to be afraid on those paths. So, and motorcycling, in a funny way, is a more mature sport. And and there are a whole lot of older riders. They're mostly pretty sensible. I mean, if you look at sales of something like the Honda Goldwing, which nobody ever under 40 ever bought,
right?
And bikes like that, big touring BMWs, and you look at some of these rallies that are held all around the country for people who want to travel a long distance and camp out with their friends. It seems to be a more mature sport now. The baby boom is aging out of motorcycling, and some of the manufacturers are in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
But I can only hope that they ride through this and come out okay on the other side. I don't see young people today, millennial age people, getting involved in bicycle racing. But I'm not around bicycle racing as much as I used to be, and there might be thousands of them.
Well, I think it's worse than that. I mean, the young people, if you're familiar with SEBA, right? Central Indiana Bicycling Association,
yeah.
the big bike
It's
club.
Huge, isn't it?
Well, it's not as huge as it was. I mean, my understanding is their numbers are shrinking, every year because the older people are kind of aging out, but young people are not joining. They don't want to be part of a club. They don't see the again, this is my understanding. I could be wrong about this, but they don't see the benefit of paying dues and being a part of something like that. They don't see how it benefits them.
I don't think they like to do the same things their moms and dads did. I think that they do everything differently.
Yeah, but the membership numbers for SEBA, I think, are in really steep decline.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah. So
Do they still get as many people for the Hilly 100 and rides like that?
I don't think so. I mean, I went to the Hilly. I was when I was on the board of directors of then IndyCog, now Bike Indianapolis, an advocacy organization for the city, and we went down the Friday night before the Hilly to sell, to take donations and to give away the bike map that the organization had created. And I hadn't been to the Hilly in probably 15 years. And as I walked around, I saw the same people. It was the same people, in some cases wearing the same clothing, still wearing bellwether jackets and tights that they had 15 years prior.
Bellwether, I haven't even thought about that brand for years and years and years.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's not a lot of new blood, I don't think, coming into some of these organizations.
But they are riding bicycles.
Yeah. Yeah,
Because
they
the
are.
bicycle for a long time, it's like the symbol of millennial life. Beer and bicycles.
Yeah, well, I think that's still the case. I mean, from everything I hear, yeah, bikes, and they want public transportation and things like that.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've never seen such a demographic change in such a short period of time in my whole life as in this last, 10, 12 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So, the reason you're here is you're coming through from buying a motorcycle.
I bought a motorcycle from a really nice fellow who lives on the Jersey Shore. He pointed and he said, "The ocean's right over there," by which I think he meant 100 yards away.
Mm-hmm.
And so I rode through Pennsylvania and down the Skyway through the Shenandoah Mountains, and I rode the Blue Ridge Parkway, and I went down to Bristol, Tennessee, where I visited the birthplace of country music museum, and I'm here to see family. My niece lives here and her husband, and then I'm going to work my way back to Denver. I've got a couple of stops I want to make. So this is a big trip for me, and I'm enjoying it without any deadlines. I didn't have to be any place at a specific time. It's nice.
Because you were on the motorcycle when you came to the
I did.
ukulele workshop.
I rode out here, and I spent some time with my niece, and there was something else going on here. Oh, I think that the big motorcycle races at Raceway Park.
Oh, okay.
No, at the Speedway on that road course.
The GP, yeah.
Motor GP was
yeah.
here, and then the next weekend was that Uke Fest. So I rode up to Fort Wayne and went there, and then I rode back to Denver. I tend to travel on the motorcycle. I especially when I do these music pilgrimages.
Mm-hmm.
It feels appropriate to get there on a motorcycle. It doesn't feel real if you drive a car or fly. That's an old thing with me. I feel I should get there on the motorcycle. And if I were a touring kind of guy, and I've tried and failed to be a touring kind of guy on a bicycle, I would feel the same way. If I arrived on a bicycle, I would be happy to do that. I always thought I should ride to my high school reunion on the bicycle, and I haven't done it yet.
That'd be a long pull.
Well, it is.
Yeah.
I mean, especially if you're going to ride both ways.
Yeah.
It's 1,100 miles. So that's got to be 2 weeks minimum, with hardly any rest days, and then another 2 weeks on the way home. So
motorcycle sounds better.
Well, 2.5 days, 3 days.
Yeah. Well, one of the threads that I think kind of go through most, if not all, these episodes is that, as I've become older, I'm fascinated by storytelling.
Huh.
And I think that, you don't have to look too far. If we talk about old music, that was all storytelling, and, most writing is some form of you're trying to tell a story. Even in a catalog, you're trying to tell a story.
That's right. That's right.
And so one of the things that I've tried to focus on with this podcast is the storytelling, and trying to kind of tune into that a little bit more. And you got a number of stories, and I appreciate you sharing them with me today.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
It's always good to see you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. All right, everybody. See you next time. Bye-bye.